Right, so this video is going to cover some thoughts about secondary articulations and how they're transcribed in the IPA. Now, first of all, there's a distinction to be made here that I think the textbook at least doesn't make as clearly or as explicitly as I would like, and that's between double articulated sounds and sounds with secondary articulations. So we've already encountered at least one double articulated sound from English, and that's the sound that we transcribe with the W, the W sound. It's double articulated because it has two primary places of constriction. Remember, a consonant's place of articulation is where there's constriction in the vocal tract. And with the W, the approximant, there are two approximant places, approximant constrictions. That's constrictions that are enough to shape the sound, but not enough to cause turbulence or a substantial blockage of airflow. One at the velum and one at the lips. So W is a labial velar approximant, right? Secondary articulations are different. What makes them different? Generally, a consonant with a primary articulation and a secondary, the primary articulation tends to be narrower. So that's the definition that we're going to go with for now. So there's more constriction at one place, less constriction at another place. So, for example, if you have a sound with an alveolar constriction that produces noise, so that's a fricative constriction, and a constriction at the palate that's more open, like an approximant, we call it an alveolar fricative with a palatal secondary articulation. And so there's a symbol that captures that, right? That's our palatalized S. So it's an alveolar sound with a secondary palatal articulation. Now, the IPA actually gives us four symbols for secondary articulations, and they are symbolized as we see on the left here. Superscript W for labial or labialized, superscript J for palatalized. We have velarized with a superscript gamma, and pharyngalized with a superscript, the symbol we use for the voiced pharyngeal fricative. Okay, each of these secondary articulation diacritics is a visually distinctive character for a consonant that represents the place of that secondary articulation. Note that two of them are approximant symbols, the W and the J, and two are voiced fricative symbols, the gamma and the reversed caudal stop symbol. And I think the main reason that they're not all approximants is the velar approximant symbol isn't all that distinctive, and there is no pharyngeal approximant symbol. But they all do represent voiced consonants. The fact that these two represent the first two represent approximants in their full form, and the second two represent fricatives in their full form, isn't meant to indicate that some secondary articulations are more approximate-y and some are more fricative-y. Yeah. And so because they're also represented by superscript letters, it might be tempting to think that these things on the right are also secondary articulations, but they're not. The first one is aspiration. That has to do with the timing of voicing events relative to oral closures. We'll talk about that more when we get to phonation types in a couple of weeks. I just want to warn you here against reading too much into the IPA symbol structure here. And the other two, the superscript L for lateral release and the superscript N for nasal release, they also aren't secondary articulations. They're things that happen as you release the sound, as the name might indicate to you. And finally, I do want to point out, I think it's been mentioned before, but it doesn't hurt to repeat, that just because something is represented with a diacritic doesn't mean that it represents an allophonic difference, right? The diacritics in the IPA always represent the same articulations, but some languages will have these allophonic differences, some will have them as phonemic differences. And so, yeah, just don't think of diacritics as always representing allophonic differences, even though that may be how it seems to you when you first learn, for example, how to indicate allophonic aspiration and allophonic nasalization in transcribing English, both of which are allophonic in English and are transcribed with diacritics, but both of those can be contrastive, phonemically contrastive in other languages, and they still get represented with the same diacritics. So, yeah, okay, I think I've made that point there. That done. Video done. That's secondary articulation. So there are four secondary articulations represented in the IPA, and it's good to know what they are.